So, Hayden, one of the things we see a lot on kind of social media, particularly from riders from back in the day, is that modern sprinting isn't as tactical as it used to be. What do you think?
Yeah, it's certainly something you hear a lot at track sessions and you see it on Facebook. But I think where they're coming from with that is you see a lot less sort of big, over accentuated moves diving underneath. But I think that's testament a lot of the time to how technically sound the top guys are these days, that they're not getting caught out by moves like that.
I mean, stuff's changed so much. Like, so when you say they're not getting caught out, you know, how has the game changed over the last 20 years? Like, what are they doing to remove that risk and that danger of getting caught out?
I think the big shift is the gears have got a lot bigger, which means riders are winding up from a lot earlier on in the race. And sort of you protect yourself with the speed, you leave yourself less vulnerable. And races these days are about sort of delivering yourself as fast as you can into the last lap, because on the bigger gears you accelerate all the way to the line, whereas before on the small gears, if you do do a big punch with a lap and a half to go, you leave yourself very vulnerable to being caught late, which isn't something we really see anymore.
Yeah, I think as well, like, it's so hard to get the sweet spot, right? Where you're going to go fast enough to protect your position, but not tie up. There's so much skill involved with getting that right, you know, like compared to, it's not as easy to just go out there and wind it up. So yeah, how do you think, so with that in mind, like how, if you were going to race or the top guys going to a race, how do you break down like each section of the race? You've got 3 laps here. You want to be going fast at the end, so at the beginning. How do you kind of approach when you begin to make that race happen?
I think it depends based on the rider as well. Sort of the punchier guys will be trying to leave it a bit later, whereas some people will be winding up more or less for 3 laps. But essentially, I think everyone knows what they need to do at each stage in the race to deliver themselves as fast as possible into the final 200. So they'll be working backwards from there. I think that's where a lot of the thinking tactically goes in these days. It's just about putting yourself in the right place to deliver on time.
Yeah, it's very interesting how things have changed. And like, you know, at the end of the day, these big flamboyant moves of diving under, of taking the inside, of going full gas lap and a half out and catching people out, whilst they look great, that ultimately is a sign that someone's messed it up, you know? So it's not just a case of saying, oh, well, one person's very good tactically. That's actually showing that someone's made a mistake, right? And I think with you look at the pro racing, and usually the top 4 pretty much finish in that order. And that's just a sign that no one's making mistakes, right? That the fastest 4 guys are usually finishing in that order because they've ridden really, really well. And if everybody rides well, the fastest rider wins. You know.
Yeah, 100%. I think you can't deny it's entertaining racing when people are diving underneath in the last 200 meters. But it is a glaring mistake from the rider in front usually. And sort of how often do we see that these days? Like, look at major world championships, European champs. You might see one a season, someone getting underneath in the last lap. And really that is just because everyone at that level is so technically sound at protecting themselves and delivering themselves on pace.
Yeah. So when they go into the race, do you think they're looking to try and, you know, in terms of that mindset of executing a really nice clean race, do you think they're looking to catch the other person out? Or do you think, because that's what we hear a lot, right? You know, if you were to go to like amateur racing, if you were to go to a lot of coach sessions, it's about catching the other person out. So putting them in a situation where the other person messed it up, and you can get a big gap. You can go and they're not looking. You can do all these kinds of things. Do you think that's true at the elite level, or do you think it's a bit more? Yeah. How do you think it kind of plays out like that?
I think if you're going into a race hoping to catch someone out, you're relying on them making a mistake rather than how to tactically approach the race to put it into your own hands. But I also think the guys at the top level, if they had an opportunity to do something like that, they'd pounce on it in a heartbeat. But it's very basic tactics. Wait for the other person to make a mistake and go. I think there's more layers to it these days. Yeah.
I think like mistakes these days come more down to like delivery speed and things like that rather than position on the track, because a lot of people have to take on from the front 2 laps out because the gears have got bigger. So I think these days you can kind of catch people out more by allowing them to deliver themselves too slowly and hit it, or by you taking height early in the race and then not really reacting to you. I think back in the day it was a lot more, you're at the top of the track on a fairly small gear, and at some point you're going to light it up. So a lot of those opportunities come in terms of the person not looking, or you getting the drive on them, getting the slipstream, then dropping in. Was these that I think it's much more about protecting yourself from the front in terms of speed rather than position on the track.
A lot of the tactics are definitely pace judgment these days.
Yeah, I think as well. Like, I'd love to take the top guys, only the top, 20, 30, 40 in the world, and take a second and a half off their 200-meter time and drop them into an amateur race. Because I think, when you watch them again on TV, it looks like they're just winding the thing up. But I've no doubt that they'd school everyone, right? Apart from a very select few, because they are tactically so good. As you said, like when if there was a mistake, they pounce on it. You can't just go into a race expecting for there to be a mistake, because there's unlikely to be one. It's like when coach at a tactics session, someone says, I was going to attack when they're not looking. And it's like, well, there's going to be a point where the person you're racing is looking over their shoulder, staring you straight in the face for the whole 3 laps. So that completely falls away when you get to a certain level. I'd love to gift myself speed to race the very, very top guys and see how you get on tactically. But I certainly, they're good, like it's, and I know that sort of sounds obvious to say, but you do watch it on TV and it looks like they're just absolutely honking around for 2 laps, going as fast as they can. It's really sort of not the case, It'd be fascinating to see that, wouldn't it? If you could just drop them into an amateur race, a masters race or whatever, and chop 1,000 watts off.
I think I'll see how they get on. Peak speed's only part of it as well. Like, having that acceleration allows you to capitalize on those sort of mistakes. Like, say about pace judgment mistakes. If someone takes, quarter of a lap off, like the accelerator take a quarter of a lap off, they sort of drift in. If you've got that acceleration, it doesn't matter about your top speed, you're able to get into that gap and get over it, which is what I'm saying about capitalizing on kind of speed judgment. So even if you did take off that peak speed, I think some of that looks like better tactics from the elite guys is actually just from having better acceleration that you can sort of move on, capitalize on most points.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are differences, right, between amateur racing, professional racing. And I know it's not as clean cut as amateur and professional, because there's some very, very, very good amateurs and there's some professionals who make mistakes. But, if you're sat at home or with the guys you work with, and they're watching the pros race on TV, they're watching the Olympics, they're watching these guys flying around in 9-second last 200s. Like, what do you think they should take from that and try and take it into their own racing? And that's like an open question, right? Because it could be a lot and it could be not a lot.
I think when we're talking tactics, there's never a silver bullet that's going to win you every race. You're just thinking about strategies to put yourself in the best chance of winning a race. And I think at amateur level, waiting for a mistake a lot of the time can actually stand up. In terms of most races you get into, at some point, the other guy is going to make a mistake and you can hit them. Whereas when you get towards the pro level, sometimes it may pay off, but relying on a mistake is no longer a valid tactic. You need to get a bit more creative with it. But I think looking at the pro guys, the positioning they have on the track and the pace judgment like we spoke about, amateurs could learn a lot in terms of protecting themselves going into sort of the key last lap and a half of a match sprint.
Yeah. What do you reckon, Jay?
I think I think you hit the nail on the head. I think mistakes are so few in pro racing that you sort of got to go in with your game plan that you want to execute rather than going in trying to get one up over someone else. I think in amateur racing, you can probably get away with that more in terms of where someone has to make a mistake in terms of observation. So I think the main thing is to take away from pro racing to the amateur guys would be know your strengths, go into the race with sort of golden valid principles that you can stick to no matter what happens with the other guy. Stick to what your strengths are. Say your peak speed is better than the other guy, make sure you're winding up that second lap. Say your acceleration's better, make sure you're not doing too much to push the other guy on, so you come into the last lap with a slower speed where you can use what you have. So I think it's more going in with knowing what you've got over the other person and sort of golden principles that no matter what happens in a race, you stick to. And it's the same as racing. For me, like if I'm racing when I'm out, not in top shape, I might be going to do some C1s in Europe. I'm still going to be racing with the same mindset of me being on top form, so I'm still going to do the same principles, even though my speed might not be as good as it would be at a major championship long.
Yeah, I think you can go into the race always with a bit of a game plan and some principles you're going to stick to. And if a glaring mistake presents itself, of course you're going to take it. It's just sort of adding layers to your tactical approach, I think.
It's being aware of where mistakes come. Like there's certain riders that make very similar mistakes all the time, so I'm sort of waiting for the opportunity to race them because they might qualify well, but you know there's certain things that they're going to do. So it's also being aware of your opponents and knowing, their strengths and weaknesses on top of you.
I think equally not to have such glaringly big strengths and weaknesses yourself, so your opponents can capitalize on that. because you don't want to be the guy who is always sort of drawn into the same mistakes. But again, I think to your point, if you've got your principles, things become more automatic. So the decision making process kind of comes much more natural, and rather than panicking when somebody does something, that you automatically respond to it. But again, I think the most common thing we see now is people panicking, right? Amateurs certainly, not at elite level. But if you can dial in your actual principles, know what they are, uh, it actually takes that stress away, I find. Yeah.
This is it. I mean, you don't want to be going into a race thinking this is exactly what I'm going to do, because you should never be able to describe what you're going to do without seeing what happens. So to have an open mind, and as I said, and that's one of the challenging things with sprinting is, the race evolves every half lap, every quarter lap. So how you respond to a different situation changes so quickly throughout the race. I think as well, one point you just touched on, which is really good, is as well, and this is just general. This isn't for elite or for amateurs, but after qualification, and this is I realise how valuable this now from coaching is work out who you're going to be racing throughout the seeding. Watch them race all day so that kind of how they race. So when from my point of view, when a rider says to me, "I've got this person in the quarterfinals, what do you think I should do?" You've got some information of the things they might be doing, and you've got to be careful not to say this is exactly what's going to happen. But you can really have some insight into how they race, and as you said, Joe, to how to maximise that. I think, that's something that's really, really important.
I think as well, a big change from us racing the pros compared to amateur guys is being able to control the race from the back. And I think very often amateurs arrive from 2 and they kind of just go along with what P1's doing, which very often plays into what P1 wants to do. But I think when you become at the elite level, you need to learn how to control the first guy from the back. And I think that's one way of really putting your mark on the race and being able to stick to your principles, even when you're not the one dictating what exactly happened.
Yeah. So I think, to give some contrast, like everyone's, there's different tracks, different levels. How, Eamon, talk us through what an average race looks like at Sundrive in Dublin. It's 400 metre outdoor tarmac track. How does the race kind of go?
Average race usually would pan out like the video of the 1980s Olympic match sprinting. People kind of roll around, maybe too high in the track, too slow, and then it generally comes down to 300 meters to go, and the next person to respond is probably going to win the race because they've got the acceleration over their opponent. It plays out like that like 90% of the time. And then, people tend to focus on what gear the other rider's on. And I went slow because they were on a bigger gear and I thought I'd get the jump on them, or whatever it might be. But generally, most races pan out that way.
Yeah.
Which I can scream as loud as I can. Sundrive's quite a big velodrome. But I think people are almost a little bit apprehensive to go early or to build speed and maybe feel like they are spending too many pennies or burning too many matches. But yeah, it plays out that way.
Yeah, I think it comes down to a fundamental point, right? Which is if you're at the front, when do you want to stay at the front? When's the part of the race where no matter what happens, you're going to fight and make sure, ensure that you stay at the front. So if there's an attack from behind, you have it covered. And just before that moment, you need to be going fast enough that if they do go, then you can respond. You can be on terms. You can pass them by the end, basically. But what doesn't help that is if you're going walking pace or super, super slow and waiting for this massive peak power attack, it's really hard to manage. And you're just rolling, it's on a knife edge, right? So when I coach tactics, I often will talk about that risk versus reward. So sure, like it can be great if that goes right. You can look like a superhero but you're like a moment from disaster. And all we really want to do in tactics is, as a constant, is make sure the fastest person wins the race. So you want to use your speed, right? If you're not the fastest person, then you can ride with a little more risk, because if both people do exactly the same, ride tactically well, you're going to lose. So you can ride with a little more risk. But I think it's making sure that at the worst moment of the race, you're not super exposed is really, really important, as opposed to going for that heroic move every single time. And I think that's why, like, if you do race somebody who's one of these super fast top qualifiers, at the end of the day, if they do a fast last 200, then there's not really a great deal you can do about it. And that's true at every level. So it always makes me smile when you see somebody in amateur racing who's half a second quicker playing all these tactical games. And I'm like, just lead the thing out nice and fast. If you do a 200 that's 3 or 4 tenths from your qualification, then you're going to win the race every time. Like, it's risk-free. So yeah, I think that's really, really important to get your head around as well. Yeah, it's interesting. So
if I could flip it, right? So we're talking about why modern sprinting is tactical, right? And potentially more tactical than it was in the 80s or ever in the 90s. What principles do you think they had? So we've talked about like having principles, tactical principles in what you're going to do in a race. But when we look at the old videos and you see people riding around and then, generally leaves it to P2 just nailing it underneath. But what principles were they approaching the race with, do you think?
I think they're generally, I think a lot of the game was there's two. There's intimidation, right? There's a huge cultural thing at that time of being intimidating, which I think is slightly lost now. So there was a lot of wanting to be close and physically dominate the opponent, have contact, be close, and what that ultimately creates is hesitation. So I think there was a big kind of flavour of that, and then I think as well that they want to. It's that classic thing. They want to essentially disrupt the gap, right? So they want the back rider dies down, the front rider cuts them off, they get there first, and that rider's then running into the back of them. So, I think it was quite reactive in a way. So it was trying to disrupt your opponent through it being close, physically intimidating, and messing up the gap they're trying to rush. And doing that by almost tempting them to dive under, but then you get there first. I think there was a lot of it. I think. Do you agree with that, guys?
I mean, I wasn't around to see it, but I think I
wasn't around 1980 either, just to be clear.
I think like you were talking about before, Pete. There becomes a point in every race where if you're at the front, you want to protect the front, and if you're at the back, you're thinking, I need to try and get to the front now. I think with the smaller gears and the slower kit back in the 80s, 90s, that point was much later in the race. So I think the principles they had probably worked back from where you wanted to be with 300 meters to go rather than now where it's sort of 400, 500 meters to go. So I think the principles were generally keep your powder dry probably and catch the jump on your opponent as late as possible. I think that's what we see a lot in the racing.
We keep mentioning the 80s, but when do you think that the tactics kind of have changed and became more like they are now?
I think it's probably been quite a gradual shift as the gears that people are racing on have gone up slowly, probably since the early 2000s. I think in the early 2000s, people were still racing on 100 or less. And then as it's creeped up, the sprints have got longer and the tactics have shifted to suit.
It's literally been over my like riding career. So I raced under 23 Euros, qualified on 100, raced on 98. And that was 2010 roughly. So relatively recently. Like it was so right, we referenced in the 80s, but actually it carried on right the way through. And I remember Chris Hoy, he went 985 on 108. He went seated because basically we just like the gear at the time it was almost because the gear was too big to stand up, and we said it was so big he had to sprint as soon as he got on track. So he just got on track and sprinted, and it blew our minds that he was on 108. And that was in about, it was after Beijing. Well, it really wasn't, it's 2009, and that was like mind blowing, absolutely mind blowing. So the big gear thing is very, very recent, and I feel like it's kind of reached its peak in that it is. I mean, we'll talk about this more, but it's truly like everyone's very open minded about what gear to ride now. There's no like threshold of just it's insane to go bigger than that, which there was. I mean, I don't know what we thought was going to happen then. If we'd have gone for, if someone had said to me you need to qualify on 110, 120, I thought my legs were going to fall off.
You won't get on top of the gear.
Yeah. And this I mean, we're going into, this is another thing, right? This on top of the gear as a concept of this sweet spot of like perfect cadence. It's you know, or spinning out right. It's the same thing that again you have this kind of ceiling. It's very, very interesting. I mean, to wrap up on the tactics thing, where do you think tactics will go over the next, let's say, 5 years?
I think it's the golden question. If we knew what tactics were going to be in 2 years, that'd be beating the current tactics. I think all 4 of us would probably be doing them.
We are doing them.
The big thing for me is, you know, do you think as speed gets higher, because at the moment the guys are hitting 80 kilometers an hour at the top end, you know, which is basically 10k an hour quicker than they were, you know, in years gone by. Do you think it's going to really change whether it's better to be on the front of the race or the back of the race, just because the last 200s are so fast?
I think all the changes with aero are going to keep coming. I think that's only going to push the sprint earlier and earlier, because riders' abilities to hold on to peak speed for longer is going to get better. So I can only see the sprint going longer, really. But then there will be a pushback period, I think, where someone with very good acceleration sort of is able to find a way to sort of combat that. But I think with more and more aerodynamics playing a big part, I think it'll probably the sprint will become longer and longer.
I agree.
I concur. Do you think it gets harder to pass the faster you go? Is that a thing?
I guess it is, but
You also will be getting more of a benefit from rushing into the gap when you're in the slipstream as well.
I presume if someone's more aerodynamic, you're going to get less behind them, which means the difference between when you step out is going to be bigger.
Then if they're going faster,
And they're going fast.
you're more shielded